In this video, I show you how you can save money by 3D printing all of the terrain for Hate. Before we get into today's video, I just want to share about the GGGG. Each month, Bob the Beholder picks one of my Patreon supporters to receive a gratitude gift. And if you want to get in on that, go ahead and click on the link in the descriptions below and check out my Patreon page where you can see what the gratitude gift is. So over 2 years ago, Simon had this Hate board game Kickstarter, and it was really successful. They raised about a little bit less than $1.5 million. And I didn't back the game at the time and was surprised because it was supposed to be Kickstarter exclusive. I found that they were selling extra copies of Hate at Miniature Market. So I picked up this core box for only $100, and at the same time I bought the Plateaus because I heard that out of all of the terrain that is normally just flat cardboard, that the terrain really you need as 3D elements in order for gameplay so that you can really tell what the height difference is. But I paid $40 for that set and it just felt really expensive. Now the core box is $120 on Miniature Market and then $135 on Amazon. And that's still a super good deal because think of Hate as the deluxe version of what would be a typical core box. So because this is a 1v1 type of game, think of a regular core box being about $100, having maybe 4 factions in it, 1 player board, and maybe some cardboard chits and the cardboard terrain that it currently has. But in this version, you are getting 8 different factions and you're getting plastic deluxified chits that you can use and pieces. So overall, because of all the stretch goals that they were able to unlock, this core box is an incredible deal. Even at $200, I think this box would be worth it. And the miniatures are amazing. It's some of the best miniatures that is in a board game, even by Simon, that typically makes pretty good miniatures. Now during the Kickstarter, the terrain was actually relatively cheap and it was a buy-in. I think you could buy the Plateaus for only $20. I think the trees might have been 15 or 10 or the huts. So they were relatively affordable. But now the prices for all of that altogether is $140. $50 for both the Plateaus and $50 for the trees. And then it's $40 for the huts. And I think that's super expensive. Paying $140, $20 more than the core box for terrain is a little bit painful. And if you want to field enough terrain for the 2 boards that come in the core game, because even though it's 1v1, they make it so that you can have 2 simultaneous games going on at the same time. They give you enough supplies to be able to do that. And that is my intent too, is to have a 4-person round robin that we would spend an all-day weekend playing together going through this campaign. But the thought of paying $280, almost $300 just to have the terrain for 2 boards, there's no way that I was going to do that. So I looked into the possibility of 3D printing some of the terrain so that I would have enough for both of the boards. So I found these huts on Thingiverse from a maker called Kevin Rao. Again, links in the descriptions below for everything that I'm talking about today. And these are free files. He has a couple of these, but I only printed out 2 variants of it. This with a bunch of furs that are piled on top, and then this one with some bones and some horns on there. And the files themselves do not print very well, so I repaired them. I also shrunk them down so that these are printing at 85%, which is the perfect size to fit on the board. I uploaded those on Thingiverse, so again, links in the descriptions below. before this, I actually do have these cool shaman huts from Printable Scenery. And the reason why I decided not to go with these ones is because it would take longer to paint these up, and they are two-piece like this. So even though these huts look thematically really good with this set, I decided to actually go with these ones, and also these are free, so you guys can grab these without paying anything. But there's a lot of different alternatives for orc-like huts. Just Google that. This is a good one, but there's a number of other options that are out there. These I found to be relatively simple to paint. And speaking of painting, by the way, I do have a painting tutorial of how I did all of these pieces, so check that out at the end of the video. So there are a lot of free options for trees also on Thingiverse, but I ended up going with Printable Scenery's Gloomwood trees. And these trees look appropriately gloomy, like the word says. So it fits the theme of this world and this game. And in fact, Printable Scenery has an alternative called Blood Trees, which probably fits even more, where there's actual corpses that are around the tree. So make sure you check that out. But I opted to go with these Gloomwood ones because it was a couple dollars cheaper, and I wanted to be able to use these trees for other games. So it just had a broader thematic appeal to other games that I could use it for. And I really like how it has sort of these bumps on them, as well as the fungi that are along the tree. So it just adds a little bit of color, even though there is no canopy of leaves. Now, one thing, because I did shrink these down to be printed at 55% of original size, it really makes the branches really delicate. So every single time I'm grabbing these trees, I usually break off a branch or two. Now that's not a huge deal, but if you don't want that to happen, there are other options where the branches are a little bit thicker and is less prone to breaking off. But I like this style and design of these trees, and so I think this works out really well. So regarding the plateaus, and this is what's going to take the most amount of time to print and the most PLA, there are some files that are available on Thingiverse. The first one I found was these risers, where you can actually use the cardboard terrain and just sit it on top of the riser. So I think that's a super elegant and really simple solution to creating these three-dimensional plateaus. Also on Thingiverse, I found someone made these tiles that do interlock with one another, so they're not sliding around. Unfortunately, I didn't go with that because there was no texture on them. So just very flat, and it didn't fit sort of the theme of the rest of the terrain. So because I didn't find anything with actual texture, I went ahead and made my own version. What I did was I grabbed Devin Jones's cave set and used those textures to basically create these hills. I made that in Microsoft 3D Builder, and if you want to see my video on how to use that simple program to create your own STL files, go ahead and click here. I also made two versions of some of the larger files because they don't fit on your typical build plate. So one of them I cut so that it would fit on my Ender 5, which has a smaller build plate than my Prusa MK3S, which I created another file that fits on that bigger plate there. So grab whichever one that will fit on your build plate if you're going to be using my Thingiverse files. And because I did originally grab the Plateaus set, you can see a comparison here between the plastic version that comes from CMON and the ones that I printed out. And the advantage of the CMON ones is that they are made to stack specifically on top of each other so that they don't slide around, they sort of interlock. But I actually like the texture of the ones that I printed out. And I find that it's not a big deal that they don't interlock, that they sit on top of one another fine throughout the game. They're not really sliding around, so that hasn't been a big deal for me. But the biggest thing obviously is saving money. So I made enough terrain to fully play two boards at the same time. And so I spent about 2 rolls of PLA, so that's about $40. So if I had spent the money to buy all of the terrain, again, that would have been almost $300. So take away the $40 that I spent on PLA, you're saving about $220 if you print out all of your own terrain. And even more if you have the third board. If you went all in on the Kickstarter, or you buy the board expansion where you get the third board and all of the chits and tokens for 2 more players on top of the 4 that are already playing, then you're saving another $140. So it's just much more economical if you're going to be playing multiple boards at the same time to be 3D printing. And at the end of the day, I think these actually look, even in some ways, better than the plastic versions from CMON. Now, that's totally subjective, but I do think that this is a great alternative and a great way to have some awesome looking terrain for this great game. And it really matches the high quality of the miniatures that you're getting from this game. So I'm going to be returning those hills that I bought, save myself that $40, and maybe buy one of the expansions with that money. But at this point, I'm going to stick with just the core set because, like with a lot of games that I've gone all in on, like for example Zombicide or others, I found that I don't even use most of those stretch goals. Overall, I think I've learned my lesson that I typically don't play a game enough to use all of the expansions and therefore have stuck to just buying the core box, resisting the temptation to go all in and buying, 3 more additional factions, buying the Mother Prophecy box, which even though the miniatures look awesome, will I really use that extra bit of gameplay? Probably not. Now, I might still get that box because those miniatures are incredible and I just might want to paint them. But in terms of gameplay, there is a ton already. 8 different factions, right? It would take a long time for our gaming group to go through all of those different factions and trying them out. So I'm super happy with this purchase, and I think that this is a great way that you might be able to save some money and 3D print your own terrain. Please like and subscribe and check out my Patreon page to see what the gratitude gift is for this month. Now I'm just going to go through the process of painting up the 7 other factions that I need to paint up in order to play the game. Otherwise, happy gaming, happy hobbying. We'll see you next time. So the first thing you want to do is just spray prime everything with this dark brown. This is actually camouflage paint, which I really like because it is really matte. And Krylon has this version of this dark brown. I think it's called camouflage brown, but I know Rust-Oleum also has a camouflage line of a dark brown. If you don't have this version, then go ahead and just pick the most matte dark brown that you can get. And so we'll go ahead and start with the trees, and I'm going to go ahead and grab this Americana milk chocolate and grab one of my hog's hair brushes and pretty much not wet it down but keep it dry, and going to just do a layer of this. And I've noticed as I have been painting these super thin branches, a lot of them actually break off when you paint them, but that is okay. I don't really care too much about that since the whole theme is, everything sort of being in a wasteland, things being dead. So it doesn't really matter to me too much that, the branches, the really fine stuff, it's not uncommon for it to fall off here. And so you want to keep, you don't have to do the whole thing, but you definitely want to keep the dark brown underneath in the cracks so that you can see the grain of the wood. So make sure not to get too much paint in there. And notice how I am mostly painting against the grain of the wood. Alright, so there you go. We're going to wait for that to dry. Now I'm going to take some honey brown and do a dry brush of this on top. You don't need to get as much of this on as you did the milk chocolate. And So with this, I'm just mostly just highlighting some spots. That's pretty much it. Now we're going to work on the stone, and we're going to first use Mississippi mud, but any brown that is different than the milk chocolate that we used will work, because you just want to differentiate between what is the ground and what are the trees. So for this, because I have to work in between all of the roots, I'm just using a large sable brush, and you want to give a liberal coating of this, but as you can see, I'm still leaving a lot of the dark brown to define in between the rocks. And then if you get some onto the branches or the roots, don't worry too much about it, it's not a big deal. So once that is done and dry, we're going to grab this fawn. And this is going to be more of a dry brush technique because we only want to highlight spots, and that is pretty much it. And the stone is definitely a different color than the tree, and that's really what we're aiming for. And you can see that I'm inconsistent in how much color is down for this highlighting, and that also is fine. So you don't have to be super consistent, as you're going to see in nature that there's variation. So do that for all of the ground. Go ahead with the fawn, grab and paint up all of these bumpy things, which I'm not 100% sure what they're supposed to be. And then if you want, you can do the underside of the mushrooms. I'm not going to do that, I'm just showing you how to do it here. I'm not going to bother doing it because when you're looking at it like this from this angle, no one is going to see underneath there. But these bumpy things, I think people can see, and that's why I'm coloring them. So you can grab any kind of red, and this time we are going to do all of the tops of these fungi or mushrooms, whatever they may be. You can pick any other color that you want. Maybe green might be a good alternative color, since the resources that you're getting from here are those green hams. I thought that if I chose green, it looked too much like leaves, that they were supposed to be leaves or something. But in essence, I sort of like the red. We're going to work on the huts now, and I'm going to just start off with milk chocolate, which is what we started off with, the trees, and just do random sections of these huts. So we have two styles of huts. This one, which has distinct layers of cloth and skins on there, or furs on there. And then this one, which doesn't really have, you can tell that there's layers, but it's hard to distinguish the layers. So I think I'm just going to do sort of monocolor for these, except for the bone, and then just do multicolor with these, have a patchwork. So basically we're just going to grab a bunch of different browns and color these, and I'm just using my brush here. And I'm not too worried about getting all of the details in, but because the brown, the dark brown underneath acts as a shading, natural shading. So here's a sample of the different colors that I used. This dark brown is just the prime color. And then this is burnt sienna. And then this lighter tan color is honey brown. So now what we're going to do is dry brush this just to try to tie it all together. Again, going to use the fawn. See how by applying this dry brush it pulls all of the different colors together. And that's pretty much it. To do the plateaus, it would make sense to match it with the rocks from the trees, and you could use this Mississippi mud instead, but I'm actually going to do something different. So I'm going to grab honey brown, and that's going to be the base coat that is going to be placed onto all of the plateaus. And I'm using this pretty big brush because there's a lot of surface area to cover, and just will be brushing it on, and pretty thick, although I am going to be leaving some dark brown underneath to show through. But don't worry about being too careful about this. Sort of go both directions. You're not just dry brushing, but you are trying to get it a little bit more deeper than you would typically have if you were only dry brushing. So do this for all of the pieces. Now just grab the fawn, and this will be the final coat that goes on, and this is actual dry brushing, so you're not pushing it in but only catching the very top edges of the terrain, because you want that first layer to be able to show through, that honey brown to show through. So just don't be as liberal with the fawn as you were with the honey brown.